Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Snow Day, your number one stop for reviews, rants, and ratings in the world of entertainment. I am your host, Hunter Verrill. Let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Snow Day. I am your host, Hunter Verrill, and today we're going to be talking about a bit of a niche topic. It's difficulty, but exclusively within Soulsborne games, and I want to make some things clear. The reason why I thought of this recently is that I'm just hitting the tail end of the first Dark Souls for the first time, and uh, it's absolutely killer. The first half of Dark Souls is incredibly difficult and at times super unfair, but for the most part, it's really good about rewarding you for the progress you've made. And all that goes out the window in the latter half because the way the world expands in order to have you continue your journey is to add extensions to already existing areas for you to fight brand new bosses in order to get their souls and then do something that I'm going to try not to spoil. But regardless, you have to travel to areas you've already been to before in order to fight new bosses and get key elements in order to go to the finale. Now, there's a couple of problems with this. First of all, you only get the ability to warp between bonfires after having beaten Ornstein and Smoke, or Ornstein and Smoke, something like that, which is, in my mind, the end of like the first major movement and the beginning of the finale. Now, you can only warp to major bonfires, so like the Firelink Shrine, which is like the first bonfire, the central area, the place where every route stems from. That's one of the main ones you can warp to. It's very, very big, and there's a lot of ground to cover in order to get to the places you need to go, especially when there aren't a lot of bonfires within the new areas. Something I've noticed, at least with the areas that I've explored for the time being, is that they're really stingy with bonfire placement. Like, as far as getting to the boss, it's usually pretty close for most other areas. You're either like one or two rooms down. Maybe you've got a bit of a jaunt, but there aren't a lot of enemies in the way, which means you're able to have a relatively, dangerless approach to the boss in order to have as much health and Estus left over as possible. That is not the case with these new bosses. One of them, you begin in an entirely different area from where it's located and then have to traverse through an area full of enemies that do leaping one-shots, travel through a cave which has invisible floors, so you have to just look for sparkles and just walk on those and randomly fall sometimes, progress through a bunch of enemies, run past a gate, and then fight him. He one-shot me the first time I got to him. Not only is it incredibly difficult to get to bosses with enough health to actually warrant an attempt, it's also super disheartening just because of how long it takes to get to them. The amount of distance you have to cover just to get one more attempt in on these bosses that have the most health in the entire game, it's awful. In my mind, Soulsborns are very much meant to be difficult and often to a sadistic level at times. Like, a lot of my friends don't play them and they wonder why I play them, and sometimes I can't tell you why, but I just enjoy them. And through the many that I've played, I've already beaten Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Nioh while I'm working on Dark Souls and plan to do Dark Souls 2 and 3, Nioh 2, and the rest. But through the ones that I've completed, I enjoy them so much because while still having that sadistic enjoyment through difficulty, they have very little parts that I can genuinely say are unfair or designed poorly, despite their overwhelming difficulty. Now, with Dark Souls being only FromSoft's second major bout next to Demon Souls, it was obvious they were going to have a few more stones in the road. Unfortunately, I didn't realize it was going to be the entire game. And now the part that really sucks, because I can't stand it, is that the game is so brilliant that it makes me stay despite how absolutely overbearing some of the problems with it are. There are these narrow corridors the game often has you fight multiple enemies in, and most attack animations cause your sword to clang against the wall, which slows you, consumes stamina, and sometimes doesn't even hit the enemy you were aiming for. Enemies that come at you laterally from above or below cannot be struck with your weapon because even when locking onto them and looking down, the character's weapon only moves in a straight line or however it's swung, because I don't really know. If you're locked onto an enemy and you're holding backwards and press the dodge button, you dodge inward for a reason that I still can't explain. There's a lot of nuance, and a lot of it is just really, really bad. Even with Dark Souls 2, like Dark Souls 2 got even worse because Dark Souls became a massive success off of its difficulty, and it seemed to cloud the minds of the creators of FromSoft because they wanted to just make things hard without the whole rewarding aspect or it being fair. It's a tightrope walk at the best of times to create something that is challenging but also fair, but they've managed to do it so well. Bloodborne is my favorite game because it has all the excellence of a Soulsborne with all the lore, all the outfits, all the weapons, all the enemies, and all the bosses, but with like 2 parts that I can say are unfair. And even then, that's being a little gratuitous because the unfair parts are just parts that are a little more difficult than the others. Like an enemy that can one-shot you in a 10-minute long boss battle, so it's just incredibly inconvenient to be hit by it. I don't even know if I can call that unfair. It's just poorly designed for a little bit. Summoning another player to help you or lowering your insight, that's a stat in Bloodborne, to 0 for that fight makes it easy. So there's no real reason for me to harp on it a whole lot. Sekiro, only times where mini-boss style enemies, more than one of them being in a room, is ever a problem. Sekiro's combat is entirely made for one-on-one combat, and as such it can be super overwhelming to have 2 competent enemies fighting you, and it doesn't really work. But this occurs maybe 2-3 times throughout the entire game, and apart from that, it's just incredible. The combat is a drug, the bosses are incredible, and the challenge is there. But Dark Souls doesn't have that. It has the challenge, it has the reward in some seriously key moments. Bell Gargoyles are still one of my favorite boss battles just because of how challenging but fair they were. Their attacks were overwhelmingly powerful and fast, and it took multiple tries for you to learn how to maneuver around them and counter them. It was incredible. But the problem is there are so few moments like that in the first Dark Souls that I can even recall while I'm playing it. The Asylum Demon is a great tutorial boss, but at the same time, it mimics the Taurus Demon's stat of hit it from above and get rid of half of its health. Not to say that it's a bad thing to have workarounds for bosses or special ways to attack them, because not only does it encourage multiple playthroughs, it also gives experienced players an edge over new players, but at the same time, it's like the animation is just kind of ripped. Like it's there. And that's not even the biggest problem. There are so many other bosses that are so incredibly tough but have so little payoff. Like, to beat a boss and to be truly satisfied is to fight something that forced you to adapt, to learn, and to be careful while still being fair. Having a health pool that isn't complete garbage. Attacks that don't one-shot you constantly without there being a good amount of time for you to react. I don't mind one-shots. I mind one-shots that are fast, unpredictable, and have way too wide of a range. I would cough and say something's name, but there are so many moments in Dark Souls that are exactly like that, I couldn't count them on a hand. Bloodborne is so incredible because it manages to have these super satisfying boss battles with incredibly virtuifying combat, but it doesn't have to sacrifice any of the player's enjoyment apart from the regular difficulty that's to be expected from FromSoft games. Dark Souls has so many hurdles that are just so unnecessary at the worst moments purely because they wanted the game to be hard, and it's still so good. That's the worst part. Obviously, there will never be a such thing as a perfect, anything, but in this case, there will never be a perfect Souls game because there will never be a perfect layout, enemy design, boss design, and satisfaction while still having a difficulty that requires you to constantly overcome what's in front of you. But in my mind, Bloodborne is what does it best. Sekiro, very close second. Now, Nioh is very interesting because not only is it not a FromSoft game, but it manages to skip over the bump of having garbage parts by allowing the player to be garbage themselves. Now, the bosses in Nioh, I would assume, are incredibly difficult, but I never really had to worry about that because there's a magic spell in the game, and there are multiple magic spells in the game, that can slow enemies of any kind, lower their defense, increase your own attack level, to the point where anytime I fought a boss, it was incredible because you would just slow them and then whack at them until they were gone. it was still satisfying because it took a long time to cast a sloth spell. That was the spell that slows them. It took a long time to bring it up. So if you were struck, you were practically dead on arrival because of how instantly you'll just be absolutely overrun. So things remained fair while still being good for the player. The challenge was still there, but at the same time, it managed to be bearable because I was able to out-cheese the cheese. If you're going to have just enemies with ridiculously overpowered strategies, at least allow the player to be equally as broken. When you bind them to the ground, when you force them to fight fair while giving the enemies so many advantages, it can't help but feel hollow. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next No Day.